earlier this year, this is something that I feel like has flown relatively under the radar for a lot of folks, but it's actually a pretty big deal. So the local city government was giving an ultimatum that if they didn't meet their quote unquote ambitious goal of 82,000 new housing units by 2031, there would be a full takeover of the process by the state.
Okay.
And so presently they're about like 32K short. And so in
How many total houses?
32,000.
So how many were they supposed to build?
About 82,000.
Okay.
So they have like about 50,000 on the books.
And they're 30,000 short.
Yeah, a little over
And
30,000
they have
short.
less than 10 years to get it done.
Yeah, about 6 years.
Okay.
And so in an effort to really push through this, Denim Dan, Mayor Lurie, decided to put forward what he called the Family Zoning Plan, which actually passed this past Thursday at the Planning Commission.
Everything passes at the Planning Commission.
Yeah, for sure, even with mild opposition, you know. So I think essentially the plan is to upzone the west side along major corridors, which would mean that buildings would be allowed to be constructed 6 to 10 stories higher than they are. I think in like the northern commercial district, it could be as much as like 14 stories high. And, you know, many of the proponents of this change say that it'll pave the way for more affordable housing. Obviously, the people that are in favor of it are the supervisors, the mayor himself, and then YIMBY quote unquote activists. And obviously, the thing behind it is real estate interest, you know, because for anybody that actually pays close attention to local city politics or just generally, you know, you would understand that YIMBY activists are really just AstroTurf activists. And so there are a lot of people who are opposed to it, some of whom are property owners and are, you know, rightfully given the title as NIMBYs. But there are also many progressives and housing activists who have opposed this. Many of these people are saying that it'll just pave the way for a new wave of gentrification, leading to an increase in demolitions, conversions, mergers of existing citywide housing. And they're also critical of the fact that it would exempt the public from the process and greenlight a lot of new development, and that a lot of the new developments won't guarantee low and moderate income housing, which is not really that surprising. You know, a lot of people are afraid that the west side is going to, you know, end up becoming a lot more like the Mission has become when they upzoned a lot of areas in the Mission, very similarly. And so, you know, this past Thursday, there was a rally in front of City Hall, which was pretty contentious. You know, there were a lot of people in support of it. Some people who are like construction workers wearing like, you know, high-vis vests and like other like quote-unquote YIMBY activists and real estate people. And then there was a silent protest that actually got heated after a while once the mayor started to speak. Some of the people who were they're protesting this new family zoning plan actually started yelling at the mayor. It kind of spilled into the actual chambers during the meeting, and you know it was not necessarily.
Who was organizing these silent protests?
So it was a combination of like progressive activists and like housing activists and stuff. It was a pretty wide margin, you know.
Yeah.
Like I know the guy who most recently ran for mayor and lost, who was formerly the supervisor of the North Beach district. He was there.
What was it? Like the San Francisco Republican, right?
He's not a Republican.
But you know, the San Francisco Republican. He was the interim mayor for a hot little second, right?
No, different guy. You're thinking of the guy that was in charge of the marina.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
It was Aaron Peskin.
Peskin.
Yeah,
Okay,
so,
Aaron Peskin.
You know,
Who was the one of the marina?
I don't know.
Go back to the right tab. Go back to the tab.
Oh,
Did you close it?
yeah, I did.
You can't close the tab.
I'll look at it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Mark Farrell. Yeah,
Mark
that dude's
Farrell.
terrible. That dude is terrible.
Oh, they're both terrible.
Yeah, he's Farrell especially though, because I think he tries to mask. Well, he's one of those like, you know, extremely right-leaning Democrats. Not that there isn't such a thing as like a right-leaning Democrat, but he's especially bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you know, there was a lot of you know, back and forth, both like outside the city hall and inside the meeting. And so there is, you know, this hasn't been like fully like passed through, and there's not like a total green light for all this stuff to kind of just start paving forward. But it does seem like at least the first initial steps of this family zoning plan are in play. So like, I was just curious about your thoughts of it. I mean, it's kind of a loaded question, but is there any way that this can play out well for working class San Franciscans and Bay Area residents?
Well, the first thing I wanted to ask a clarifying question: were any trade unions represented in some of the pro upzoning stuff?
You know, in the article, I read like 3 articles on this. I didn't see any that like explicitly said that the trade unions were a part of it, but I also wouldn't be surprised because there are a lot of the construction unions are pretty conservative. They're mostly concerned with like more jobs and thus like building whatever they're able to build. And this is just based on what I read in these articles. There's probably more stuff out there, but I would imagine they are in favor of this because it's going to mean more jobs for their union members,
Well, I think, thank you, Dale. But going back to your original question, I think, okay, so when a lot of these housing projects happen, I think the real question that a lot of housing activists will harp on, rightfully so, is, what type of housing, right? Are we just talking about market rate units or actual subsidized units? So then I think there's some would say, so the devil's advocate to the NIMBY approach would say that when they create these different housing projects, whenever they add housing, they also create opportunities for subsidized housing that working people can apply to or have some type of income qualification that they can actually afford. The reality is that they make the area, as they add housing, right, as they add luxury housing, they make the area less affordable overall, and then replace it with less housing units than what is actually lost as they push the market up, right? So I think you have to see it from that lens. Like obviously. When say Mercy Housing, for instance, opens a housing development, yeah, you can't apply to that. But overall, the adding of that housing, which again is only partially subsidized, they're adding dozens, if not hundreds, of market rate units when they do each of these projects, which overall, shifts the market up. Or it shifts the market up. There are these key trade-offs, right? The reality is that, the city, they've been adding all this different housing, this luxury rate housing, and, the average person can't afford it, right? But the reality is that a lot of these real estate companies see housing as like a safe bet for investment, right? And so in places like San Francisco, where housing is so memeably expensive, right? Where the cost of living is so incredibly high on average because there's so many fucking wealthy ass people
Rents
here.
have gone up recently.
Yeah, they've gone up recently, which is ridiculous, but also totally understandable. Right. And so it becomes then even the idea of building housing, even if it's going to be politically contentious, is still quite appetizing for a lot of these real estate people. However, but then you see how the slowdowns in the economy make it difficult for them to move on a lot of these things. But as they view it, sitting on housing stock, even if it doesn't become productive, it's still going to appreciate in value through that basic expectation. Overall, we'll see how that plays out in the next few years. Right. But I think, you can't really look at this and see like, oh yeah, things are going to get it's going to get cheaper now. I don't think there's any like a real good example that people can find in urban areas of them adding housing stock that's mixed, right, in the sense they're adding market rate units as well as subsidy units and have it actually decrease the cost of living. They decrease the cost of living when they actually increase those subsidies to people and actually create more affordable housing options, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you're totally right, not just with like it being a safe bet for real estate interests, but a safe bet for investors generally, owning property, whether it just be land or actual buildings, allows them to make money on that. Obviously, these like construction contracts can be extremely lucrative as well. And like a lot of these companies like have their hand in like the materials aspect of it, or even just like, own some of these companies that they might try to, have take on these contracts and whatnot. So there's a lot of money to be made in generally, and I have to agree wholeheartedly. I think this is generally like one of those big myths that's unfortunately out there that a lot of people buy into because they're just listening to this logic of capitalism, this logic of like, well, like the only way to build your way out of a housing shortage is to build more housing, when in reality, there's only a housing shortage if housing is a commodity, if property is a commodity. And this is something that, many people have talked about over the years. I mean, I think even Engels talked about it in the 1800s. And it's like one of those examples that still rings true to this day, that I feel like not enough people are really even looked into,
Well, people don't have a basic education on political economy, right? So they think that if they increase the supply, then they're going to lower the price, which is hilarious because that like literally just doesn't happen, right? That doesn't happen. They don't anyway, like the pursuit of profit is so high that people selling capitalists selling commodities, things like housing, they're not going to just reduce the right when there's a glut in price and in supply, I should say. But the one connection I wanted to make is going back to these real estate companies, because it's so because we hear about, because I feel like if we talk about just real estate from the angle of them building housing or not building housing, I just don't really feel it's that interesting. It's just pretty like just numbers and cents, right? Nickels and dimes, gentrification, more or less. But like I think going back to what you're saying, when we think about really just like the nature of like the real estate market itself, we see like just these really just how it's like it's just such like a big piece of like our system of finance capital. And what I mean by that is that these real estate companies aren't just have their fingers in just like our social life, right? Through the creating of subsidized housing, through these different through our local government to actually pass through housing. It makes me think of an interesting event that was put on, I think, by Writers Against the War on Gaza. And one of the examples, which is a really great group, protesting a lot of the unfair media coverage of Palestine and the present war and genocide going on there. But they brought up one of the examples they highlighted was the work of the Crown Heights Tenants Union out in New York City. And, they're a group of people. They're protesting a lot of these. I think they're a particular real estate group. I believe it's the Pinnacles group out there. And so they're like, it's a major housing, housing shell company, whatever you want to call it, that's deeply invested in a lot of kinds of housing in New York City. But one aspect of its portfolio that the Crown Heights Tenant Union has been exposing is a lot of that is on different contracts in Israel, right? They're like, I think Pinnacles got a lot of their initial funding from the Israeli bond market. Right. And so like they're trying to make that clear connection as they protest the dilapidation of their units to apartheid in Palestine. And I think, that's a really, a connection that I think really reveals the nature of a lot of these companies, right? That they're building up, they're really just doing this stuff, getting into real estate, advancing real estate interests for the sake of their own money. They'll do it under anything. They don't care what it is. It could be apartheid, it can be luxury units in the Mission. And I don't know necessarily the companies that are directly involved right here that haven't been listed up to me again, but that'd be interesting for us to go into a lot of these big real estate companies and see actually how many of them are invested in apartheid or regimes around the world. I wouldn't be surprised.
Or even just like have had a heavy hand in like gentrifying areas, like even within the same city that they're operating in,
absolutely.
I mean, that seems kind of obvious, but it also, some people don't get that point. It's like when you point out that the hypocrisy that like Mercy Housing has been trying to kick people out of, people in the Western Addition for a long time, and then they suddenly get granted a contract in like Sunnydale, it still falls on deaf ears because people think it's like, well, we don't really have any options around this. It's like, well, like, this is gentrification. It might not be what people typically see as it, but it is a part of it.
Yeah, the same dudes are doing it. Same people, same companies.
Yep.
All right.